When balanced, sattva brings many benefits to the person. Remember that sattva is considered to be the happy, holy personality in Indian philosophy. Sattvic people are characterized as calm, contemplative, and detached. And that's because in Indian philosophy, a calm mind is a superior mind. Consciousness and awareness is the principal aim of Indian philosophy, and detachment is prized. And so the sattvic diet is designed to lead a person in that direction. Generally, sattvic people try to live a virtuous life, and the virtues make a person happy. A sattvic person may be more empathetic, or they may seek to a perspective beyond their own ego. They try to see beyond their own ego. They try to see beyond their emotions of the moment. They're willing to accept delayed gratification. Sattvic people try to be flexible, consider what others have to think, and that's a great thing. In Vata individuals, sattva expresses itself as clarity, openness, and subtleness. Vata people in general are open to spiritual ideas, and they like to see connections between things. In Pitta people, sattva expresses itself as knowledge and understanding, right judgment. In Kapha dosha, sattva expresses itself as forgiveness, love, and compassion. So all those are wonderful things. What about sattva out of balance? What happens then? Well, the question is a bit of a contradiction in terms, actually, because in the Ayurvedic texts, sattva is defined as balanced. Sattva is the natural state of the mind. And so the orthodox position is that sattva is balanced. So how could we ask and talk about sattva out of balance? Is that a contradiction? Well, many modern practitioners have a different interpretation of sattva, rajas, tamas. And it's the one that we adopt in our course. Instead of seeing sattva, rajas, and tamas as levels of virtue, we discuss them as different personality types. You know, just like in the doshas, no one dosha is better than the other. It's not like we think of vata as better than pitta or kapha as better than pitta or vata. Each dosha has positive, negative qualities, and that's the take that we're going to use on sattva, rajas, tamas, seeing them as different personalities, not levels of virtue. So what can we say about sattva when it goes out of balance? Well, in excess, sattvic people are stuck in their head and a little bit disconnected from their body. Think about the perpetual student who gets degree after degree but lacks life experience. I wouldn't exactly say that every graduate student is a sattvic person. I think this actually happens a lot in the realms of purity. Like sattva people try really hard to be pure, and they end up becoming disconnected from their body in that way. Not by studying books after book, but it could go in either direction. I want to introduce a term called Gnosticism. Gnosticism is any philosophy where awareness, consciousness, or enlightenment or knowledge is the supreme path to spiritual advancement. So you'll recognize immediately that most of the Indian philosophies, especially Buddhism, yoga, Sankhya philosophy, have a real Gnostic tendency, that they are seeking consciousness, awareness, and enlightenment. And specifically, Gnostics will seek higher levels of consciousness. You probably may have heard that term. Well, most professors in academic institutions love Gnostic religions because professors love the mind. And they see enlightenment as the crown spiritual achievement instead of love. Well, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, right? If you are seeking enlightenment, I think most people who are seeking enlightenment believe that the enlightenment will help them be more loving. And of course, I think that love also makes a person enlightened. So these are not mutually exclusive, but which one is your principal focus? Is a great question. Are you seeking love or are you seeking knowledge in your life? Both of those are good, by the way. To seek knowledge and to seek love are both great virtues. So, but Gnostics tend towards the knowledge side of things. They believe a specific conscious state or meditative practice will lead them to spiritual transformation. All right, well, when that runs amok, the person with excess sattva can have intellectual pride. They may have a holier-than-thou attitude, a self-righteousness. They may think of themselves as more evolved. I don't know if you've heard people talk about those, or use those terms. But, we should always recognize that many forms of spiritual progress don't involve knowledge as the supreme goal. Such as working in a soup kitchen, or raising a nice family, or even just having intellectual humility. Now, you need knowledge to do anything well in this world, but that doesn't mean knowledge is your aim and goal. Some heart-oriented people are very holy too. Here's another thing I want to mention with sattva. That the mind loves to boil life down to patterns and formulas. And a person who's stuck in their head can have a formulaic way of dealing with the world. And that ends up being a little impersonal, a little aloof, a little detached, right? Instead of seeing each person as a unique thing, the person who's stuck in their head may just be applying a method or a formula over and over again. Even I think many Gnostic systems will propose some kind of formula for God, like an eightfold path or the Four Noble Truths or things along those lines. Ayurveda does this. Ayurveda boils and balances. I don't think Ayurveda does this to excess, but individuals can. Ayurveda boils health problems and imbalances down to a series of patterns, such as guna, taste, and dosha. And Ayurveda says, hey, these patterns are really helpful when approaching a client. And I couldn't agree more. Those patterns are helpful, but we can never pretend that patterns reveal the essence or soul of the client. We can't use formulas to penetrate deeply into the client's nature or even God's nature. We have to remember that formulas are just a very helpful overview, orientation, and tool for improving health, right? We still need to get to know the person in a deeper way. Well, perhaps I should have posed it as a question. What about you? What do you think? Can life be described by formulas and patterns? That's the great hope of math. It was the great hope of Pascal, a early 20th century mathematician. All right, I mentioned already that sattvic people are focused on living a very pure lifestyle, and that could lead them to rejecting nearly everything around them. From people who aren't sattvic enough, food that isn't sattvic enough, environments that isn't sattvic enough, and they become overly scrupulous, right? Scrupulosity is a real trap for sattvic people, and what is it? It's it's a person who has this very holy, very sacred desire to be pure or good, and that desire ends up making it impossible for them to love anything or forgive anything, right? This world is an imperfect world, and we have to figure out a way to love it, right? And if we're so focused on purity that could lead to rejecting anything that doesn't exactly fit the model, that perfect sattvic model. And I think this is always a danger that a person on the spiritual path has to watch out for. Be constantly on guard for scrupulosity. There's many examples from my clinic where people who are following a sattvic diet of purity ended up having very restrictive diets and ended up either orthorexic or even worse, anorexic. So be on guard. If you're living a life based on formulas, if you're choosing foods from a rule book that's a bit rigid, could lead to asceticism, a bit of stoicism, and really undermine your happiness instead of giving you that natural, free, sattvic happiness. Sattvic people are universally minded, and so they tend to, because they like to watch things from a distance, sort of thing. Get that perspective instead of that egotistical approach. Sometimes they can have a real unstable identification with themselves. They feel what others feel really easily, but they have trouble figuring out what they feel themselves. Now, I had a client who referred to her body as the body, and she would say, the body is sick right now, or the stomach is nauseous. And I thought that was very odd. So I asked her, why are you speaking about your body as if, in the third person? And she said her guru told her to do this so that she wouldn't be too attached to her body. And I just think, I just want to pose that question to this student. Like, is that extremist? So sometimes sattvic people can border on the ethereal. This client in particular had a very far-off, spaced-out look, almost as if she was living life in another world. She spoke very softly, but she was also constantly taken advantage of. So because of detachment, a sattvic person can lose their instincts around what is desirable, pleasurable, or even necessary for basic human survival. Or satisfaction. I want to say that we're not just trying to survive, but we're trying to thrive. It's part of that, that belief, in some ways, if we believe that the world is an amazing place, that's one way of praising God, right? Like, it's like, oh, God, you're so great, God, that you made a great world. And if, so if we don't relish this life, or we lose a taste for this life, and we see the world as not good, or something that's not desirable, not pleasurable, and in some ways that can be, a way of thinking that, oh, well, maybe God didn't do such a good job. There's a kind of when I see a beautiful mountain vista or a beautiful sunset, it naturally leads me to praise of the creator, of the grand architect of that. And so if if a sattvic person is a little too attached, too detached, they may lose that relish and taste, and even connection to their own sense of pleasure. So sattvic people tend towards austerity and delayed gratification. And they may see everything as truth, or everything as an illusion, or everything as an expression of the divine. And that can lead to a lot of confusion or trouble discerning what is good or bad for them, their family, or their community. And I mention this because it happened to me. I was really into the sattvic lifestyle and, lots of meditation. And I became very confused through that and lost my relish for the taste of life. And like the anorexic, it's really hard to get that back afterwards. I remember, and still on some levels, really struggle with that.